Good morning, students. Hope you all are fine and staying at home to deal with this difficult situation effectively. Today, I'm going to take up the third and final part of the first chapter of our book Honeydew, the Best Christmas Present in the World. But before we start, I would like to request you all to bring a paper and a pen to note down the important points of the chapter mentioned here, and also to do the activity if it is there. Students, have you done the homework given to you in the previous class? Yes, I know. You all must have done. You all are sincere students. Before we formally begin this part of story, let me give you a brief account of the story which we have already covered in previous classes. We have seen that how the narrator found an old roll-top desk containing a very special letter. The letter had a description of a wonderful happening of the Christmas Day of year 1914, the First World War. Through the letter, a very effective way to resolve the conflicts between the enemy countries was given. According to the narrator, sports and games can be used as efficient tools to pacify the matter between the warring nations. Children, let me give you a brief introduction of the general objectives which I am aiming at while teaching you this part of the chapter. My objective will be to develop the interest of you people in the given story. I would also like to make my students confident to read the chapter with correct pronunciation, stress, intonation, pause, and articulation of voice. Through this chapter, you should also develop your imagination. I would also like to prepare you for the world citizenship. Children, my specific objectives for this chapter will be to make students realize the importance of peace, freedom from the feeling of hatred, anger, and rivalry. I would also like to expose my students to the style of story writing. I also would like to teach them the moral of the story. This chapter will also help them to mold their character. Students, now let me present a pictorial representation of the story in the form of a comic strip. I have designed it to help you in understanding the story effectively in an interesting manner. It will give you a quick review of the previous parts of the story which we have already done. Yes, students, you can see how it all began in a junk shop of Bridport, where the narrator have found a roll-top disc, which he always wanted to have. See, the condition of the desk was not good. But even then, he bought it because it was going for very little money. And he thought he could restore it. See, students, how the narrator brought it to his workroom and started working onto that on the Christmas Eve. You can see how many thoughts were there in his mind, how the roll top was completely damaged, but even then he decided to work over it and finally found a black tin box, sellotaped and properly secured by the owner. This is how he found a letter which was written to Mrs. Jim McPherson, and the address was written over the envelope as 12 Copper Beeches, Bridport, Dorset. He could not hold his emotions, and out of curiosity, he just read the letter. Yes, students, now you can see how Mr. Jim McPherson has written this kind of letter to his dear wife, Connie. See, you can see the date that it was written on 26th December 1914. It itself suggests that the letter contained the happening of the previous day, that means 25th December 1914, the Christmas day. Student, see how this strip shows Mr. Jim McPherson has written a letter to his wife to describe a wonderful event which he had witnessed on the Christmas morning. And it was that how the enemy party have come to celebrate Christmas with them. And this enemy party is Germans only, which are called as Frids in the story. See, children, how Germans have initiated this peaceful celebration of Christmas on the war front. How they celebrated all this together by waving white flags that shows peace and harmony. Students, you can see how these two people, one Mr. Hans Wolf, the Fritz Army General, and the other one is Mr. Jim McPherson, the British Army General, they met each other, they celebrated Christmas together without having any feelings of hatred for each other. See, they celebrated. Here, Jim came to know that Hans Wolf was a musician and used to play orchestra, whereas Jim was a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Children, you see that how it was quite amazing for Mr. Jim McPherson to make peace in the middle of the war. He wrote all these feelings, which were quite amazing, to his dear wife Connie in the form of this letter. We can see the impression of Fritz officer who gripped the hand of our Tommy officer, Mr. Jim, very warmly. It showed that he was having very soft feelings for Mr. Jim. And it all started. See, somebody bought a football and they started playing a friendly match. Hans Wolf, Jim, they cheered, they clapped together, they stamped their feet together in order to cheer their own teams. But there was no enmity. They all were happy and in joyous frame of mind. Wasn't it amazing? Then Hans Wolf came with a wonderful idea. According to him, there is a very good way to resolve such kind of wars, and that is a football match. Because in a football match, nobody dies and no children are orphaned. No wives become widow. Mr. Jim also agreed over the fact. You can see how they were agreeing over each and everything, but even then, the most amazing fact was that they were the representative of two enemy armies. Children, you can see how they were busy in watching the game. As far as the result was concerned, Fritz won 2-1. They admitted that soldiers of both the armies wanted peace and to meet their family members soon. In this part, we can see they went back to their respective dugouts and gave a melodious rendition of carols during the night, thus spreading the message of peace and goodwill. Jim finished the letter with the hope of meeting his wife as soon as possible after the end of the war. So, the author put the letter back in the envelope and decided to hand over it to its rightful owner. Students, I have presented the story we have done so far in this strip form. The remaining part of the story will be shown to you later on. Now let's read the remaining part of the story through silent reading. And you have to underline the difficult words, whose meaning I will tell you later on. Now I am going to give you a brief summary of this part of the chapter. Having read the letter, the author put it back in the envelope. He decided to give the letter back to whom it belonged. The address was of Bridport, Dorset. So he drove to that place in the search of its rightful owner. He found that an accident fire caught in Connie's house and she was shifted to a nursing home. He rushed to the nursing home where he found the late soldier's old wife, Mrs. Connie Macpherson. She was grown too old, now 101 years old, and still waiting for her husband's return. She mistook the author by understanding him as Jim, her husband. She declared him her best Christmas present in the world. Children, now it's time to take up the meaning of the difficult words used in the story. The first word, muddle-headed, means confused. The second word, conservatory, a greenhouse. Next, suffused with, spread all over will be its meaning. Next, lit up, means became bright with happiness or excitement. Next, matron, a woman in charge of medical institution. Next, burned out, means destroyed by fire. Next, means wide open. Then, a new word is used in the chapter is wicker chair. You might have seen such kind of chairs, especially placed in the corridors of hospitals, hotels, etc. So they are the waiting chairs in corridors. You can see it in the picture. Children, as I have promised, I have come up with the remaining portion of the story in a strip form. This shows how the narrator went to Bridport to hand over the letter to Mrs. Connie. When he reached there, he found her house reduced to a burnt shell. When he inquired, an old neighbor told him that Mrs. Connie was shifted to a nursing home after an unfortunate fire accident. So, he reached to the nursing home. There, Mrs. Connie took him as her husband. It was a very sensitive moment, as tears were there in her eyes. She declared him her best Christmas present in the world. Hope you all are now quite clear regarding your understanding related to this story. Now let me check it with a quick recapitulation which comprises some short questions which are like this. Question number one. What did the author find in the small black tin box? Second question. Who are the Fritz and Tommy? Children, I feel you all must be very clear with these two terms by the time. The third question is, who of the two armies took the initiative for celebrating the Christmas together? How did they begin? Fourth question, what did Mr. Hans Wolf do as a civilian? Means when he was not a soldier. My fifth question is, where was Mrs. Connie staying up presently? Why? Children, your answers must be brief and to the point. I am giving you certain minutes to solve these questions. Children, I feel you all are ready with your answers. Now it's time to check them. I am going to give the answers. You have to match yours with them. The first answer is that letter was written to Mrs. Connie Macpherson by her husband Mr. Jim Macpherson from the war front. Second answer, Fritz was a common name for the German soldiers, whereas British soldiers were commonly called Tommies. Third question. Fritz, German soldiers took the initiative of that friendly match. They started it by waving a white flag. Fourth answer. Mr. Hans Wolf was a musician and used to play the cello in an orchestra of Dusseldorf. Fifth answer. Mrs. Connie was in a nursing home presently as she had met an unfortunate fire accident. Students, it's time to discuss the comprehension check of page number 15. I'm going to read the question and you have to give me answers and then match your answers with mine. First question. Why did the author go to Bridport? Yes, children, are you ready with your answer? Yes, the answer is the author went to Bridport to hand over the letter to Mrs. Connie Macpherson. Second question. How old was Mrs. Macpherson now? Where was she? Its answer is Mrs. Macpherson was 101 years old. She was in a nursing home in Burlington House on the Dorchester Road on the other side of the town. Now let's take up the comprehension check of page number 16. Question 1. Who did Connie Macpherson think her visitor was? Yes, children? Yeah, it's correct. Mrs. Connie Macpherson thought her visitor was her husband, Mr. Jim Macpherson. Question 2. Which sentence in the text shows the visitor did not try to hide his identity? Answer. The sentence which shows that the visitor did not try to hide his identity is, I explained about the desk, about how I had found it, but I don't think she was listening. Children, now it's time to give you a short worksheet. It has an extract of the story followed by some questions. You have to give answers briefly. Remember, such kind of extract-based questions frequently come in your examinations. So, here we go. Oh yes, said the old man in his slippers. He knew her well. A lovely old lady. He told me a bit muddle-headed, but at her age she was entitled to be. Wasn't she? 101 years old. Children, now the questions. Question A. Who was wearing slippers? The B part. What are the adjectives used in the above lines for the lady? C part. Find the word from the above lines which means confused. D part. What was the present age of the old lady? It's time to match your answers. The answer of A part is, an old neighbor of Mrs. Connie Macpherson was there in his slippers. The answer of B part is, lovely, old, muddle-headed are the adjectives that are used for the lady described in the extract. C part. Confused means muddle-headed. The answer of D part is, the lady is presently of 101 years. Children, now it's time to discuss working with the text of the page number 16 of our book Honeydew. It comprises some questions which you have to answer. First question. For how long do you think Connie had kept Jim's letter? Give reasons for your answer. Its answer will be Connie must have kept Jim's letter for a long time. This is because she told the narrator how she read it quite often every day so that she could feel that Jim was near her. Question 2. Why do you think the desk had been sold and when? Its answer is yes, the desk must have been sold when the house in which Connie Macpherson lived had caught fire. She was taken to a nursing home. All the burnt up things must have been sold after that. Question 3. Why do Jim and Hans think that games or sports are good ways of resolving conflicts? Do you agree? Yes, children? Yes, its answer is Jim and Hans thought that games or sports are good ways of resolving conflicts because nobody dies in matches, no children are orphaned, and no wives become widows. Due to these reasons, games are good ways for resolving conflicts. Wars only lead to death and devastation. I do agree with as it is the best way to resolve any conflict between two enemy countries without losing so many. Now the fourth question. Do you think the soldiers of two armies are like each other or different from each other? Find evidence from the story to support your answer. Yes, children, its answer is the soldiers of two armies were like each other. Below are some instances from the story to prove this. First instance can be taken. Both the armies celebrated Christmas together. Both the armies shared their food and spent time together in smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, and eating. They played a football match and agreed that conflicts and disputes may be resolved by football match. They agreed about the negative aspects of war and longed peace. They exchanged carols and hoped to unite with the family again. Now the fifth question. Mention the various ways in which the British and the German soldiers become friends and find things in common at Christmas. Yes, children, its answer is on the cold, beautiful, frosty Christmas morning, the British and the German troops celebrated Christmas with each other. They enjoyed each other's food. All of them were smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, and eating. Hans Wolff and Jim Macpherson shared the cake Connie had baked. They talked about Bathsheba, Gabriel Oak, Sergeant Troy, and Dorset. They even talked about the books they liked. They agreed about everything. Both the troops played a game of football for which both Hans and Jim cheered, clapped hands, and stamped feet. They also exchanged carols at night. In this way, they celebrated Christmas together, finding a lot in common between them. Now the sixth question. What is Connie's Christmas present? Why is it the best Christmas present in the world? Its answer is Jim's last letter is Connie's Christmas present. It is the best Christmas present in the world for her husband had not come back from the battlefield. Moreover, she feels the visitor to be her husband. Her mental state is changed. She is delighted and seems to be a normal lady. Now the seventh question. Do you think the title of this story is suitable for it? Can you think of any other title? Yes, children? Yes, its answer is yes, the title is most suitable to its theme. It is because when Connie gets a present from the visitor, she's extremely delighted and there is a tremendous change in her behavior. Another title may be Battle and Peace or Friend or Children, it's time to give you a homework. Do you think the world today needs some healthy recreation rather than shallow ideologies and hunger for hegemony? Write your views in around 150 words in the form of an article. Hope you will all do this and give me beautiful articles in the next class. Children, it's time to say you goodbye. Thank you very much. Hope you have enjoyed the story and got all the points which are important for your examination point of view. See you soon. Thank you again.